Good evening, everyone. My name is Stephen Woolfolk. I'm the Director of Programming and Marketing at the Kansas City Public Library. And it's a pleasure to be here tonight in the library of my home office to welcome you to what I think is safe to say the first ever online-only installment of our award-winning Signature Events series. We've always thought of our signature events as an extension of the library's broader collection. We strive to bring you credentialed speakers on topics of history, science, and current events, and more. We hope that our events are a point of discovery, a starting point for those interested in broadening their minds and learning new things. If you attend one of our events or watch online and come away having learned something new, we count it as a job well done. And if from there you take it upon yourself to learn more, whether it's about a historical event or an alternative point of view, well, that's when we feel as though we have really done our job. Our physical locations are closed right now, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't be able to continue to rely on your library. We're working hard to continue to provide as many of our core services as possible in a digital space. The resumption of our signature event series is just a small part of that. Our children's librarians are doing online story times every day at 10 a.m. on the library's Facebook page. Our reference librarians are busy finding reliable resources related to COVID-19 and stay-at-home orders that they're posting regularly on our blog. We have removed the password from our wireless internet network so that each of our locations can serve as a drive-up internet hotspot for anyone in our community who does not have access at home. And our collection development team is moving mountains to expand and improve your access to ebooks and digital audiobooks. If you have a library card, you can already access those collections. If you do not, you can sign up for an e-card at kclibrary.org/ecard. The e-card is available to anyone living within our service area and grants immediate access to our growing digital collection. Back to the matter at hand. It's a pleasure tonight to welcome Clifford Thompson. Clifford is the author of 4 books. His essays on books, film, jazz, and the American identity have been published in the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the Village Voice, the Oxford American, and the Los Angeles Review of Books, among others. He is here tonight to discuss his latest book, What It Is: Race, Family, and One Thinking Man's Blues. The book was named one of the most anticipated books of the season. It was reviewed by, among other platforms, National Public Radio and the Washington Post. If you have questions tonight following the event, you can leave them in the comments and we will try to get to as many as we can. If you're interested in purchasing the book, it is available through other press or through the retailer of your choice. Clifford Thompson was raised to believe in treating every person of color as an individual. And he decided as a young man that America, despite its history of racial oppression, was his home as much as anyone else's. As a middle-aged man, happily married father of biracial children, Thompson finds himself questioning his most deeply held convictions when Donald Trump ascends to the presidency, elected by whites whom Trump has refused to judge as a group, who Thompson has refused to judge as a group, and who make up the majority in this country. In the grip of contradictory emotions, Thompson turns for guidance to the wisdom of writers he admires, while knowing that the answers to his questions about America ultimately lie in America itself. Through interviews with a small but varied group of Americans, he hears sharply divergent views as to what is happening in our country, while trying to find his own answers, conclusions based not on conventional wisdom or on what he would like to believe, but on what he sees. Please join me in welcoming to the Kansas City Public Library, Mr. Clifford Thompson.
Thank you. It's very good to be here, to be with you, and thank you for to all who are watching. I hope all who are watching are doing well in this crazy time and staying safe. And so I'm here to, as Steve said, talk about my book, What It Is: Race, Family, and One Thinking Black Man's Blues. As Steve mentioned, the book is largely about race in America, and the sort of catalyst for writing the book was the 2016 presidential election. And the book is in large part a personal response to that election. It may surprise some to know, though, that the germ for the book was in large part my admiration for the writing of Joan Didion, So for those of you who are not familiar with Joan Didion's work, she is an essayist, a novelist, and a memoirist. She's written acclaimed books of essays, including um, The White Album and Slouching Towards Bethlehem. In 2005, I believe it was, she published a very popular memoir called The Year of Magical Thinking, which was about the period following her husband's death and her daughter's diagnosis with what turned out to be a fatal illness. Um, what fascinates me and what attracts me to Didion's work is her ability to look below the surface of things to see what's really going on. Joan Didion does not deal in received wisdom or what's called received wisdom. She wants to see what for herself what's going on. And a good example of that is was the case of the Central Park Five in the late 80s in New York City. Five young African-American men were convicted of brutally beating and raping a young woman in Central Park. Now, at the time, uh, there was a near consensus on the guilt of these young men. But if you look back, to my knowledge, one of the only voices who questioned this verdict was Joan Didion's. She pointed to the lack of evidence against these young men, and today, those men who are no longer young are known as the exonerated five because it came out that they did not commit the crime. So that is an example of Didion's ability to kind of look below the surface and see what's going on. I'm also interested in what I take to be the arc of Joan Didion's career and her thinking. Didion is white. She was born in late 1934. She grew up in California. And like many people who grew up in California, as she has written, she absorbed the stories and the myths and the legends about California as being a land of self-made people who created the state virtually out of nothing. And like many people, she grew up believing in this ethos, the rightness and righteousness of America and whatever it did. And that was symbolized by figures such as John Wayne, whom Didion wrote about in Slouching Towards Bethlehem, among other essays. And then came the 1960s, this sort of cataclysmic decade. And the events of the 1960s caused Didion to question some of the beliefs and stories that the stories she had listened to and the beliefs she had held throughout her life. And it wasn't only that she questioned the particular stories she had been told about America and California. She came to sort of doubt the validity of the story itself. One of her most famous essays, the title essay of The White Album, the first sentence of it is, "We tell ourselves stories in order to live." In other words, life is made up of many events. And in order to get through life and to make sense of life, we tend to impose an order on it and to tell stories about it, which often are arbitrary. And coming to this realization caused a lot of confusion for Didion, because if she could not believe what she had been told and what she had always believed, then what could she believe? And so I would say that when she came out of this period of confusion, it was not with the belief that that no story was valid. It was more the belief that many of the stories we had been told were the wrong stories or were inaccurate stories. And she seemed to take it upon herself after that to go after the real story, to see below the surface of things, to what was really going on. So the result of this were books such as her book Miami, and a number of her political writings, as well as the piece I described on the Central Park Five. So I came to observe sort of parallels between the arc of Didion's career and thinking and the arc of my own thinking. Like Didion, there were beliefs that I held. Some I was, some I grew up with, and some I sort of formed on my own. Among the ones I formed on my own, I mean, these beliefs had much to do with being Black in America. So if you're a Black person in this country, if you're aware of the situation of Black people historically in this country, it's almost necessary to come up with a way of thinking about it. So there's a sort of a choice to be made. Do you embrace the idea of America and of being an American despite the country's history of oppression of people who look like you? Or do you reject America? Do you reject the idea of being an American despite the sacrifices of generations of Blacks before you who have worked so that you can be free? So the decision I came to personally was that I decided to embrace being an American and my Americanness based on the sacrifices of people who had come before me. And also because of an idea or something that appealed to me in the Black American story, which I like to call the quality of improvisation. What do I mean by that? It seemed to me that when Black people face challenges in this country, there were we had to improvise to come up with ways around these challenges, which were not ready made. So, for example, during slavery, you are enslaved. You don't have recourse to a legal solution to this problem. So, what do? One of the solutions turned out to be the Underground Railroad. So that was a matter of improvising, of coming up with a solution where there seemed to be none. In the 20th century, when the struggle was to secure the rights that Black people were assumed to have been given 100 years earlier, what do you do then? So the answer then was the civil rights movement. So these are instances in which there was no clear answer to the challenge until Black people came up with the answer. So this improvisation to me has a symbol. I was already a fan of jazz, but the quality at the heart of jazz is improvisation. And so this became a sort of a symbol or metaphor to me for the story of Blacks in America. So this was a set of beliefs that I sort of developed on my own as a younger person. And so, so the equivalent, so, as I said, the 1960s presented challenges to Joan Didion's beliefs. And sort of my equivalent of that, something that challenged my beliefs, was the result of the 2016 presidential election. So the country elected a man who had received the endorsement of the Ku Klux Klan. It elected a man who had bragged openly about fondling women he didn't know. He ran a campaign built on xenophobia, the wall and the whole thing. And this man, whom I consider to be a racist, this was America's choice to be its leader. So at that point, my question was, well, what's going on here? And this is where the model of Joan Didion came in, because when you see that the majority of white voters supported Donald Trump, it would be easy to conclude that that most whites in this country are racist, that the country itself is mostly racist. But the question I had is, what is really going on beneath that easy answer? Is that the answer, or is there something else going on? So I wanted to emulate Didion as far as trying to look below the surface of things and see what was really going on. So, I mean, to really understand, I would have to look into the hearts and minds of millions of people to be sure. Obviously, I couldn't do that. What I could do, and what I decided to do, was to interview a small number of people in depth, a varied group of people, to conduct in-depth interviews on the theory that the views that I learned about would stand for the views of other people too. So at that point, I went on social media. I went on Facebook. I wrote on in a post to my friends. I said, "Hey guys, do you know any Trump supporters I could talk to? And preferably, these would be Trump supporters who would not want to kill me." A couple of friends of mine in California said that yes, they had neighbors that they could introduce me to. So I flew to California. I conducted in-depth interviews with a couple of men, and I met or exchanged correspondence with a third man in Missouri. And the way that I got in touch with him was that I had gotten in touch with him earlier because his daughter had sent an email to my website saying that her father was looking for a Black man named Clifford Thompson, whom he had served with in Korea. And she wanted to know if, if I knew this man, if maybe I was the son of this man. I was not, but we kept in touch. And so when I started to do this project and was thinking about people to interview, I asked this gentleman what his political beliefs were, and it turned out he had voted for Trump. So he agreed to be interviewed, and I conducted a long interview with him by phone. So in these interviews with Trump voters, several commonalities emerged. So the men I talked to were all, in their 70s or older than that. All were white. They presented themselves as people who do not consider themselves to be racist, and that was not the reason they voted for Donald Trump. However, in speaking to me, it became clear that they did have negative attitudes toward people of color, even if they weren't aware of them. And I really don't think they are conscious of them. They all shared a belief in the basic fairness of life in America, the belief that if you just work hard, all your problems will take care of themselves. And when asked about the challenges facing people of color in this country, they tended to attribute that to the values that the people of color themselves shared, and that were instilled during slavery and passed down through the generations. That was their interpretation of the cause of Black people's troubles, such as poverty. And they did not attribute any of these troubles, or most of these troubles, to any sort of outside factors such as racism. And I would say, based on my conversations with these men, that they are not, at least not consciously, contemptuous of Black people so much as indifferent to their concerns and ignorant about their challenges. And so obviously, racism, I would say, accounts for some of Donald Trump's support, but I would say there are also other factors at work. The other people I interviewed, I came back east. I interviewed a social worker in the South Bronx, just to sort of get a feel for what was going on the ground. And finally, I interviewed a man named Philip Smith, who was the founder and president of the National African American Gun Association. Just learning about the existence of this group made me curious about what this man would say. And as it turned out, he had quite a bit to say. So these were the people I interviewed. In my book, there's a concept I talk about often in my book, and it's the concept of rootedness, what I call rootedness. And this is based on the idea that for most of us, it's very hard to get through life without being rooted in an idea or a set of beliefs or a place or a community or something larger than yourself that sort of gives that secures your identity. And what I've discovered what I've concluded about rootedness is that while it is a grounding factor in one's life, it can also blind one to, it can blind you to what's in front of you, because if what is in front of you contradicts the set of beliefs that your identity depends on, then you're going to resist believing something, even if it's clear. And so that's what I conclude about rootedness in the book. I was talking earlier about sort of the foundational beliefs of my life, and one thing I grew up believing, and still believe, is in the importance of treating everyone I meet as an individual, not basing my judgments on skin color, and so that meant not being prejudiced against white people. The 2016 election, in which most white voters supported a man who had received the endorsement of the Ku Klux Klan, led me to, just for a time, to question the wisdom of this opposition to prejudice that I had. So that's one of the things that I struggled with in the book. The subtitle of the book, of course, is Race, Family, and One Thinking Black Man's Blues. And family, my life as a family man is very much a part of the book. And it intertwines with the subject of race throughout the book. And toward the end of the book, the two subjects merge in a way that I think and hope is satisfying. So in terms of the structure of the book, the book has an introduction and 5 chapters. The first 2 chapters trace my life and the development of my thinking. Chapters 3 and 4 comprise the interviews that I conducted, and chapter 5 has my conclusions and reflections. So as I said, much of the book concerns family. So I thought I would read a selection of the book that does that, and this is from chapter 2. I'll put on my specs. See what we have here. All right, this is from chapter 2 of the book. Trouble often arises from contradiction. There are those contradictions you can live with and those you can't. One of the former for me is having children. I mention being a father not because it makes me special, it hardly does that, but because it makes me representative. Parenthood has given me, all at once and paradoxically, an appreciation for the fragility and preciousness of life, a sense of inadequacy in my role as a shepherd of 2 young lives, and a tendency to wonder what life, all life, is for. How can I feel all of that at once? Let me begin answering that by telling you a story about my wife. Amy grew up in Manhattan with her younger siblings, a sister and a brother. When she was 5 years old, her mother underwent a gallbladder operation. The operation was botched. From then on, Amy's mother was mostly bedridden. Her father, a book editor at the publishing house where he had met Amy's mother, took up the slack where the care for his family was concerned, until, that is, he got lung cancer, which acted on him very quickly. Amy was 11 when he died. For the next 6 years, her mother was in and out of the hospital. Amy was 17 when her mother, too, passed away. For her senior year of high school, she was taken in by the family of a classmate, while her sister and brother went to Maryland to live a Dickensian existence with their mother's sister and her family, adding feelings of guilt to Amy's other troubles. Amy, slender and blonde, has a way about her that I don't think is unconnected to the events of her childhood. She is a caring person, utterly devoted to family and friends. She loves a good laugh, but politeness is not her bag. She can be frank in a way that some find startling. We make, in some ways, an odd pair. I grew up in a family that was polite to the point of indecisiveness. What do you want to do? Doesn't matter, whatever you like. Amy cuts through all that. She knows what she wants and she tells you what it is. Maybe in life we seek out the people who supply what we are missing. In any case, I've always seen her manner as following at least partially from the events of her formative years and the lessons she took from them. Life is short and unpredictable. We don't have the luxury of dithering. She has an air of knowing what to do. I admire it. Sometimes it drives me a little crazy. And she never breaks my heart more, this woman I love, than in those rare times when that quality of hers falters. Which brings me to our children. Amy is a terrific mother, maybe the best one I know. But if there are times when neither of us knows what to do, it is because the job of parenting involves fundamental contradictions. There is, for example, the disconnect between your necessary efforts and the way things turn out. Our younger daughter is today a quiet, truly sweet young woman. As a baby, she could cry like nothing and no one you ever heard. Oh my Lord, could she cry. I'm thinking of one summer night in our apartment in the late 1990s. Our daughter, let's call her by one of her nicknames, Louie, was maybe a year old, maybe a little younger. For whatever reason, and Amy and I nearly drove ourselves insane trying to figure out what it was, on this night, Louie simply would not stop crying. Her eyes were slits of misery, her mouth in the shape of a mangled wheel, and good God, the noise she made. Imagine the wails that would come out of you if a rusty nail was slowly inserted into your pupil, and imagine those wails playing on a loop, and you began to have some idea of what she sounded like on and on into the night. Someone outside may have thought that that's what we were doing to her, because in the middle of this madness, through the open bathroom window of our third-floor apartment, I somehow heard, during one of those rare blessed pauses in Louis' shrieking, a young male nitwit who was standing at the bus stop call up toward us in a sing-song, "Baby, why is the baby crying?" Because she's a baby, you moron, I yelled back. He must have called the cops. The next day, a downstairs neighbor told us that the police had come to the door, but left upon being reassured that all was well. Our upstairs neighbor, meanwhile, lost his patience. I distinctly heard him shout, Jesus, and the whole time, Amy and I were passing Louie back and forth, jiggling her, cooing at her, feeling more and more desperate, resisting the urge to toss our daughter and then ourselves out the window. Finally, Amy, who was holding her, could take no more. Now my wife and my daughter were crying, and seeing Amy's usual air of assuredness break down, I wanted to cry too. Instead, I said, here, I'll take her. While Amy went to try to sleep, I held Louie and willed her to stop crying, and she stopped. Needless to say, she didn't stop because I willed her to. She stopped on her own, and there you have it. You try and try and try, and if you're lucky, things turn out okay, but not necessarily because you exhausted yourself trying, and that, in a nutshell, is parenthood. And those are just the times when you try as hard as you should. Then there are the other times when, despite your best intentions, you find yourself asleep at the switch because, in the end, you are not equal to this job you must do. In my memoir, Twin of Blackness, I refer to Louie's older sister by one of the nicknames she had as a little kid, the Pie. Let's keep calling her that. One Saturday in the winter of, I think, 2000, when the Pie was about 6, she and I bundled up and walked a block to Prospect Park so she could sled. The park was frozen over, all white and silver and glistening in the January sun, and packed with families. I don't know what my excuse is. I don't know if I have one for what happened next. Maybe I was sleep deprived from being up during the night with Louie. In any case, I took the Pie to the top of the hill. She got in her plastic sled, and soon she was flying toward the bottom before I took in what was down there, jutting up out of the whiteness. A big, hard tree, and a few yards away from the tree, lengthwise and widthwise, a black cast iron lamppost. When I saw the tree and the lamppost, I also saw that my daughter was heading right for them. I ran after her helplessly, footfalls crunching in the snow, shouting her name with as much chance of catching her as of catching a runaway train. She picked up speed as she headed for the tree and the pole, and then she sailed right between them. She was fine, no thanks to me, in spite of me. I don't think a week has passed since then that I haven't remembered that episode, and when I'm in the mood to torture myself, I imagine an alternate ending, the one I deserved for letting my guard down, as I always feared I would. Of course, even when you don't let your guard down, even when you do what you mean to do, you wonder if it's the right thing, because your impulses often go against your mission. I think too about one day when Louie was about 3 years old and I took her to another kid's birthday party. The kids played musical chairs, one of the many games devised by adults to torture children. After one of the rounds, Louie came toddling toward where I was sitting, and I'll never forget the way she looked. This was the face of a little girl who had had enough of the rough and tumble, whose defenses were worn down, who simply needed, if only for a minute or two, to be held. I've met parents who would have told their kids in that moment to just toughen up and get back in the game in preparation for a life without their dads to comfort them. Maybe that would have been the right thing to do. But I took Louie onto my lap. Father and daughter whisked us together. Sometimes, in other words, you make mistakes not because you don't love your kids, but because you do. They become the center of your world, in fact. And then, after all that, they leave you. This is as it should be, though I will say that I got a glimpse of the pulling away process that no father should ever get. One warm weekday evening, when the Pie was no longer a 6-year-old on a sled, but a sophomore at a Manhattan high school, she hung out with friends in the city. Then she rode the subway back to Brooklyn and called me from the station to let me know she was on the way home. Reassured, I went back to the book or newspaper I was reading. 15 or 20 minutes later, I realized she should have been home by now. The walk from the subway was no more than 10 minutes. After another 10 or 15 minutes had passed, I decided to go outside and see if I could spot her. I walked out of the apartment building, hung a right, went to the corner, and looked down the avenue, whereupon I had the following sequence of thoughts. Oh, good, there she is. Oh, okay, she's hugging her friend goodbye. Oh. She parted from the young man, her first real boyfriend, and walked toward me. We looked at each other sheepishly, then went, without a word, into our building. And that, of course, was just the beginning of the pulling away process, which brings me back to the hopelessly original yet persistent question of what it's all for. You and your partner, or you alone, work to build a family. You worry and you worry some more every day until one day your children are grown and, you hope, capable human beings. And then they leave off, you hope, to become productive members of society, to do their part in sustaining that society, leaving you with a hole in your heart. And that's when things go well. Your children may start their own families and produce society-sustaining adults, sweating over their children so those children can go up and leave and maybe start families, and on and on. And why? What is the society that our children must leave us to maintain it, that its maintenance requires of us such trial and heartbreak, requires that we deny our laps to our toddlers? And doing so may make them more ready to face the world, but might it not also make them just a bit colder? I could be accused here of protesting the existence of dragons, but I don't think that's it. As everyone surely does from time to time, I simply honestly wonder. In any case, these other contradictions of parenthood, being told, 1, this is your vital mission. 2, you are not equipped to carry out this mission. 3, this mission, like everything surrounding it, makes no sense. 4, go. And of course you go, because that is simply what you do. All parenting is the same, and each job of parenting brings its unique challenges. My daughters, whose mother is white, look pretty different from me. They don't quite look white, but you wouldn't look at them and think black either. This bothered me in the beginning, not because I could not see blackness in them, but because I could not see me in them, which went against that biological drive that produces children in the first place, the blind desire to continue the species, to recreate oneself. But our bond quickly overrode any doubts. These children were mine, that was all. Of course, what one knows and what the world sees are different, with rare exceptions, such as the homeless man who saw me walking with Louie and said, "Y'all look just alike." Strangers see me next to my daughters, who have white girls' hair and skin much lighter than mine, and they are thrown, here in the 21st century, for a loop. A college friend of mine, a black man who visits me in New York once a year or so, walked beside me one day as I pushed Louie in a stroller and observed about the people passing us. The white people have looks on their faces like, "Oh, okay." The black people are like, "Uh-huh." A white cab driver in upstate New York who picked up Amy, Louie, and me came out and asked us, "Are you guys a family?" I could not love my daughters a bit more if they were mirror images of me. I could not love them any more than I do now. Amy and I have tried to teach them to be kind people. Whether or not because of that, they are kind people. I have talked to them about their Black American heritage. When they were younger, I often mentioned to them the African kingdoms of Mali, Ghana, and the Songhai. I don't know if they remember. God knows I've played them a lot of jazz. For the most part, though, their identities, cultural and otherwise, are theirs to figure out. I have done what I knew how to do. That is what most parents do for their children. All this is to say that parenthood comprises a set of screaming contradictions that you somehow learn to live with. And then there are those contradictions that simply stop you in your tracks, that pit all you believe and all you are against the reality in front of you. One such contradiction was revealed for me by the election of Donald Trump. That catastrophe does have one factor in common with parenthood. It has forced me to consider things anew. And the two were to lead me to similar conclusions in the end, but I will come to that. So that's from chapter 2. I feel like I'm jumping around a bit here, but I thought I would say something about the art in the book. So here's the book, what it is. I painted the cover, and I did images for the inside. And I thought I would say a little bit about my background in art. When I was growing up in Washington, D.C., my ambition was to be a professional comic book writer and artist. This ambition lasted until I was about 18. I wrote and drew my own superhero comics, but I got to a point in which I decided that I was both better at and more interested in the writing than the drawing. So I put art aside for quite a while. And then about 12 years ago, I began to paint. And if I'm any judge, I'm a better painter than, or I paint better than I draw. I recently joined a gallery in Manhattan, so I'm excited about that. It's called the Blue Mountain Gallery. The illustrations in the book, there are 5 chapters and an introduction, and each chapter and the introduction has an image to accompany it. The images show the narrator, but from the back. The idea being that you then see what the narrator sees. So that's the story behind the art in the book. And I thought I would just close with one more, much more brief section of the book toward the end. So I will read that now. Oh, and I'm supposed to say that if you have questions, please put them in the comments section on the YouTube page. So I will close out with this from near the end of the book. It is not uncommon for a person, especially a Black person, to talk about injustices and to be asked in response, "What are you complaining about? You're doing fine." As if having a happy life disqualifies one from acknowledging the pain of others. Those responders are right about one thing, though, at least in my case, the part about doing fine. I've had a good life, in large part for the usual reasons. I've been married for a quarter century to a woman I love. I have 2 great children. I have had the good fortune to find 1 or 2 things I can do reasonably well enough to get immense pleasure out of pursuing them. And then there is this, the joy of being what I call plugged in. I don't use the term the way others do. I don't mean anything having to do with networking or using electronic devices. I refer instead to the excitement I feel over the prospect of learning ever more about the art forms I love. Something akin to faith is involved in the continued desire to learn, a faith that there is value in it, that it is all for something, even if the things learned prove to be their own value. I keep reading, keep looking at art, keep watching films, keep listening to jazz. Jazz involves a tireless exploration that nonetheless acknowledges the limitlessness of what can be explored. One day recently, I walked over the Brooklyn Bridge while listening on my headphones to Alfie's Theme by Sonny Rollins, an experience I recommend to everyone. Rollins's wonderful extended tenor sax solo seems to search to bore a hole through the earth in this investigation of ideas, even as it suggests the possibility of more to investigate and the still greater possibility, nay, the certainty, that we will never know it all. It is a source of both anguish and comfort, though mostly comfort, that I will never get to the bottom of any of it, that I will simply explore as much as I can. And yet, every so often comes a voice whispering, "For what?" Having almost certainly passed the halfway point of my life, what is it I am so studiously working toward? A body of knowledge and insight that will one day reach its glorious peak so that I can then die? The answer to this is no less true for being a cliche. It's the journey, not the destination, etc. Yes. The beauty of this chestnut is that it can apply to other areas of life. The drawback is that it is easier to think than to feel. To the question, what is the point of raising a family when your children simply grow up and leave? I can answer, at least part of the point is the memories of raising them, the memories that they share from the journey too, except that those memories make me miss them more, not less. The question about the point can be asked about marriage too. I sometimes feel as if I am in silent communion with my wife's parents who died when she was so young, whom I never met and who never knew of my existence. As if they have entrusted her care to me, not because she can't take care of herself, but because we, all of us, need caring for, protecting. And yet there is no protection, not in the end. Sometimes when my wife and I hug each other tightly, I feel as if we are trying to hold off the inevitable. None of this is to say that the journey concept is not useful. Its value, I think, lies partly in its appreciation of the beauty of the parts as opposed to a concern for the validity of the whole. I may not see my children every day, but I can still smile when I think, for example, of one particular evening. Amy and I and our girls, then 10 and 6, stretched out on our beds at the Windswept Motel in Point Pleasant, New Jersey. As we watched the 2004 Olympic Games on television after a day of hanging out at the beach and the pool, I thought to myself that I would take nothing in the world in exchange for where I was. And this appreciation of the part, the individual, as opposed to the whole, can apply as well to groups of people. So I think I'll stop there and turn it over.
All right, thank you, Clifford. We have a few questions that are coming in. I wanted to ask you first on kind of a lighter note.
Yeah.
Favorite jazz musicians, keeping in mind that you're talking predominantly to a Kansas City audience here.
Yeah. Who are my favorite musicians?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. I tend to favor sort of classic jazz. So I listen to I listen to a lot of as I said, Sonny Rollins. I like Miles Davis. Speaking of Kansas City, though, I'm a big fan of Lester Young and Coleman Hawkins. I like Charles Mingus. I like Billie Holiday. So I listen to more contemporary things, but I find myself coming back to the classics. Some days I only want to listen to Duke Ellington.
All right. So first question here from our audience. What most surprised you about your interviews with Trump supporters, in a good way or maybe not such a good way?
What most surprised me? I think, well, one thing that was a kind of a pleasant surprise was how welcome they made me feel in their homes. You know, how much they opened up to me, and for that reason, you know, we uh, started off talking about non-political matters, and they would tell me about their lives, and we felt so comfortable. You know, I shared beers with one of them, and we clinked bottles, and it was very friendly. And so then when we got around to politics, and I said, "Do you mind if I ask you who you voted for in the presidential election?" It was almost a jolt when they said Donald Trump, because um, you know, I associate Donald Trump with such negative things, and the fact that I was so comfortable in these people's homes, just that was kind of a jarring moment, even though it was the whole reason I was there. So I would say that just the combination of the divergence of our political views and how comfortable we felt personally was was surprising to me.
Okay, another question we have here. So your book and the voice of your writing reminded me a great deal of Carol Anderson and her book White Rage. Are you familiar with that book? And also, do you think the people that you interviewed, are they capable of shifting their perspectives?
I'm sorry to say I have not read that book. I know of it. As for whether their perspectives could shift, that's a really good question. I would answer that actually by saying that I got an email to my website from a man in Texas who said that he had supported Donald Trump. He, like me, has two daughters. They're younger than mine. And a friend had given him my book, and he read it, and he said that now it wasn't clear that whether or not my book changed his mind, but he sounded like he was repenting for having voted for the man he did. So I think it is possible. I do think it is possible.
Okay. So a question from me here. You know, when I was growing up, my dad used to tell me that he was racist, and I didn't see any outward evidence of that. His
Mhm.
the only friend, he worked for the railroad. The only friend he had was a black man. We would spend weekends every other weekend with our family.
Yeah.
You know, there was no indication, but he would tell me that he was. Um, do you think that the election of Donald Trump has that? Uh, and he supported Donald Trump after being a union man, a lifetime Democrat. Donald
Hmm.
Trump was the first Republican he ever voted for. But has is there something going on that is bringing those people out and bringing those views that they were aware of but were kind of suppressed to the forefront? Something going on bigger here?
Oh, absolutely. I think so. I think Donald Trump gave people what felt like permission to say and think whatever they wanted. I think I think he both brought out what was already there and encouraged some things that possibly might not have been there already. And I think that's one of the dangerous things about this man. And this is a little off topic, but one of the saddest things to me about all this is what young children are going to take away from it. You know, if you see the leader of the country who feels free to insult people over, you know, over their height or how they look or just whatever, you know, how are we supposed to tell our children that they shouldn't do these things when the leader of the country is doing these things? So yes, I would say. And, you know, it's a fact that hate crimes have, or at least the number of hate crimes that have been reported, have gone up since he's been in the White House. So, so yeah, I mean, I think somebody like him being in a position that he is in seems to just give people permission to do things that they might not do otherwise. I compare it to when you're in elementary school and the teacher is out and there's a substitute teacher. And, you know, maybe the substitute teacher is not the best, the greatest in the world, and the kids just take it upon themselves. They just start acting however they want to act. I feel like it's a similar situation.
Okay, two more questions here. So first, what advice do you have for parents living in this moment in time? What should they be doing? What should they be telling their kids? What should they be making an effort to teach them?
Mm, mm. I think it's very important to not necessarily to shield their children from what's going on, but to explain it, and to explain it in detail. Maybe it's important to, as painful as this might be, maybe it's important to watch some of the president's press conferences, have children observe what's going on, and explain to them that it should not be this way. That this is not how a statesman should act, and that we need to do better than this. I think, of course, parents still are, especially young children, parents are still the primary influence in their lives. And I think during this time, one of parents' jobs is to explain just how messed up things are right now, and that they need to get better.
Okay, I lied because I have a spinoff question from that one.
Okay.
So across the country, there are parents right now that are home with their kids. They're homeschooling. I know my son gets assignments from his teacher in elementary school. They last him maybe an hour and a half a day.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any books and or films that you recommend? I'm thinking specifically, one of my favorite books was Just Mercy. Obviously, my 10-year-old isn't going to be able to read that.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a movie out now. Are there any books and or movies that you would recommend that maybe parents should be sharing while they're home with their kids?
Sure. That's a really good question. Interestingly, one of the first movies that comes to mind is a movie that my teacher took our class to see when I was a kid, which is Sounder. I don't know if you remember that from the 70s. It had Cicely Tyson and Paul Winfield, and it was about a Black family during the Depression. They were, if I recall correctly, they were sharecroppers. And, I think I've been asked in my life, I've had conversations with people who are not Black about race. And I've been asked a couple of times, look, Black people were freed from slavery 150 years ago. What's up? How come Black people aren't doing better? And I think people don't understand. I think in different parts of the country, education in American history is not what it ought to be. And I think if people understand the challenges that people of color have faced historically in this country, there might be a better understanding of where we are now. There's so many disparities still, and I think watching a Black family in the Depression, the father is locked up for no good reason. They're sharecroppers, and sharecropping was its own form of slavery. And so I think movies like that are important. Another one, when my daughter was in elementary school, actually, her 5th grade teacher had the class watch Glory, the movie about the Civil War, and about the Black regiment, one of the Black regiments in the Civil War. So I think these are good things to share with kids. Yeah.
Okay, we have a last question here. First of all, one of the best examples I've heard a friend of mine used when trying to explain why the legacy of racism is still relevant, and in answer to those people who say, well, it's been gone for so long now, could it possibly matter? And he used the example of, let's sit down, you and I, and let's play Monopoly. Mm-hmm. But for the first 5 times around the board, you're not allowed to buy any property. I get your $200.
Right.
And then after 5 times around the board, now we're going to play by the regular rules.
Yeah.
And technically going forward, the rules are fair.
Right.
But are you going to catch up before that game's over?
Exactly. I think a lot of people don't understand that. And, one of the disparities going on in the country is, there's inherited wealth, which a lot of Black people simply don't have. So, if you face an economic crisis like the one in 2008, for example, if you fall on hard times, white people are more likely to have a cushion for that kind of thing than Black people are. So yes, I think there are all kinds of things that people are not necessarily aware of. But I do love the Monopoly example. That's wonderful. Yes.
Right. Well, here's our last question, and then we'll let you go. I know that you're a busy man. Do you fear that the shifts in racial views that you've seen in the past 3.5 years are long-term, regardless of the outcome of the 2020 election?
Well, What's interesting, I would say if there is any good outcome of the 2016 election, it's that, I think it has sort of, like I say, encouraged certain negative views, but I think it has also kind of revealed what was already there. So it's not that in 2016 the country suddenly became racist. Um, Donald Trump was elected because of attitudes that are already in place. So I mean, in a way, depending on how you look at that, I think it can be either a positive or a negative thing. And I am hoping that the Democrats prevail in the fall. And I think I think if anything has been demonstrated by this, it's that the leader matters, and the attitudes of the leader from the top down matter. And I'm certainly hoping that we have a leader who will speak more positively about these matters. And I think it can make a difference. I really do. So.
All right. Well, thank you, Clifford Thompson, very much. We appreciate you taking a little bit of time out of your day to spend with us. And how's the book doing? Is it selling well?
Well, it's doing okay, but it could always do better. Hint, hint, hint. Yes. So,
All right.
Yeah.
Well, again, if you are interested in the book, you can, of course, get it through the library, or it's available through the publisher at Other Press or the retailer of your choice. We hope you'll give it a look. It really is a fantastic book. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. And thank you again, Clifford Thompson.
Thank you
For having you.
Yeah.